Still in diplomacy, the 51st Pacific Island Forum Leaders Meeting has kicked off in Fiji's capital, Suva. Leaders of the 18-member bloc are meeting in person for the first time since the COVID pandemic started. Many issues actually, are expected to be discussed, including the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. And for more on that, let's cross live to our correspondent Greg Navarro in Suva. Greg, you've been following this very closely. So how about we start with this grand design, the 2050 strategy for the bloc. Would there be more actions on the implementation of this?
Well, that's a very good question. That will be the focal point here on Thursday, and it'll take place in the hotel behind me, the Grand Pacific Hotel, where many of the leaders from the various nations across the region are staying. They'll talk about the implementation and the specifics. We got a bit of a taste today. You know, there have been events leading up to today, but today the Fijian Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama held opening remarks, which were not only very welcoming, given the fact that a lot of these leaders haven't seen each other face to face in nearly 3 years because of the pandemic. His remarks were also very comprehensive, and he did allude to some of the issues that will be talked about in that. However, they haven't released everything yet, but certainly the pandemic was front and center in those remarks because, as he had mentioned, not only have they not had a chance to meet face to face, but you have to remember that poverty has been a huge issue across the Pacific for some time before the pandemic, and certainly COVID-19 really just exacerbated that, stopping industries, keeping people out of work, and just made matters worse. Now, Bainimarama has also been one of the loudest voices here in the Pacific when it comes to climate change and the need to address climate change now because of the impacts, which in his words are very real, and they are happening now across the region, including here in Fiji, where there are villages that have had to be moved inland because of rising water. So that is one thing that they will talk about very much. It will play a front and center role in that blueprint that you mentioned. He also talked about the increasing geopolitical changing landscape. It sounds very fancy, but in essence what he's talking about is the impacts, for example, from the conflict with Ukraine, I should say, the rising energy prices, all of those added costs to countries that are already facing very real economic hardships. And he talked about the renewed attention from both China and Australia. You may remember that Wang Yi recently made an 8-day, 8-country, 10-day tour across the region, signing many agreements with many individual countries. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong also has been here several times now, in essence to do the same, to reaffirm Australia's commitment under a new government there to the region. So there's been what people here see as a little bit of competition for the attention, for the favor of these Pacific Island nations. He also acknowledged that one of the nations that was supposed to be here, the Micronesian nation of Kiribati, actually pulled out of the forum just before it started. That sent quite a shock here. There were a number of reasons for the country doing so, but in essence one of them was the direction of the leadership. They weren't happy. Now, in fact, Bainimarama acknowledged that and said that he hoped that eventually that it would come back to the Pacific Island family here. So as I mentioned, that blueprint you alluded to, that takes place, a discussion, the implementation on Thursday. I should tell you too that Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, newly elected Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, will arrive here tomorrow and take part in all these discussions. And again, the highlight will take place here on Thursday.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Greg Navarro in Suva.